Hey guys, so I wanted to get on here and kind of tell you about some things that you might find on the quiz that some folks have kind of been asking about a little bit. Remember, we're kind of looking at adaptations and how that allows them to survive, which there's behavioral adaptations and structural adaptations. Those two types of adaptations will basically allow organisms to survive and reproduce in whatever environment they're in. If they're in that environment, the reason they're there is because those behavioral and structural adaptations have allowed them to flourish there. So really what we're looking at is these organisms all have behavioral and structural adaptations that have helped them live in these areas for probably millennia, right? So I kind of wanted to give you an example. So structurally, a lot of the things that you've been seeing, spines, right? If they have like little spines, that can be both for protection as well as it increases surface area, so now they can sink slower. And then a lot of those like diatoms are disc-shaped, so they've basically taken their whole body, if you will, and they've spread it. They're already really light, but they've spread that body over a large surface area that can now basically float or at least sink slower. So basically by increasing their surface area, because these guys are mostly microscopic, it allows them to to sink slower, which if you are a phytoplankton, phyto means plant, plant-like, so they do photosynthesis. If you're a phytoplankton, you want to stay in that light column a lot longer, and so by sinking slower, you stay there longer. Some other structural advantages, obviously some have appendages that they can move, which that also crosses over into behavior at some point, because now you can move them to get to where you want to be. But the structure of having appendages that are movable is an advantageous adaptation to have, because it allows you to swim to some degree in the water, so you can change where you're at. But one of the ones that's kind of often overlooked is reproduction, and reproduction is actually a behavioral adaptation, also structural in terms of what they're composed of. But I wanted to show you the Daphnia, because Daphnia kind of set the stage for a really good example of behavioral adaptation through reproduction. So if you saw the Daphnia, they're basically this guy. It's a little bitty crustacean, which just means that it has a hard carapace or shell. And those guys have legs inside. Those legs are actually used to move water through the carapace, which then allows them to filter feed and eat small little phytoplankton or single-celled algae. But you can actually see in this guy here that his digestive system is kind of this green deal here, and then right here, when it's ready to poop, his shell opens up. This front belly is kind of like a clamshell here. It'll open up, and this will actually flick out, so it actually opens up, and then he can poop. But these guys right here, these little circular things, are eggs. So these guys have eggs, which I guess these girls have eggs. But there's some cool. Well, let's stick to reproduction for now. So this dude right here, when she reproduces, most of the time, and you can read this here on this Wikipedia deal, but most of the time, females will actually just do asexual reproduction, meaning that they take their chromosomes, they divide them in half into two cells, just like you do mitosis, right? And then those cells will become their own individuals, right? So they basically will be copies of mom, right? So in that sense, they're basically just copying themselves over and over and over again. But what's really cool is these guys don't live very well when the water temperature starts to get below about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So they start shutting down for winter time. And they can't really survive in cold water, so they have to kind of change their reproductive strategy. And at this time, they actually start laying eggs or producing eggs well, let me back up. These eggs that they typically produce in warm water will hatch inside the female, and then the female will brood those eggs for 3 to 5 days before she actually lays those babies. So they actually give birth to live babies who were eggs inside of them, which I believe is oviviparous reproduction. But you can look that up later. I don't need you to know it right now. But basically, they give birth to those live babies. Then as the water cools down, like I was talking about earlier, they know that winter is coming and that all of their babies will die if they give birth to them. So they start producing egg cases that have a little bit, I guess, heavier shell, a little bit thicker shell that can survive harsh conditions for longer periods of time. They might also do this just in areas where maybe drought comes, so when the water starts getting lower, they might sense that to some degree and change over to this reproductive habit where they lay eggs. But those eggs can then survive for those stressful times, and then when the environment is suitable again for those guys to live, basically they will hatch and then live again. Now, so the only time really they go through sexual reproduction is when they lay those eggs. There are males there that actually fertilize those eggs, which then leads to some diversity within, or genetic diversity within the species. So it's really kind of interesting. You can read about it here under their life cycle. And it's interesting stuff, but basically in the life cycle, it shows that most of the time they are females just reproducing themselves over and over and over again, and then they go into where a son or a boy will then mate with them and produce those eggs. So it's kind of an interesting thing. Read about it, but that is an easy way to see how behavioral adaptations can then help them survive. If these guys live in a temperate zone where you have, winter months that are colder than summer months, these guys will essentially go dormant in the winter, but those eggs are there waiting to hatch again when the spring comes. And then they'll switch back into their pattern of just reproducing themselves over and over. So it's kind of an interesting thing. So the other things that you might see on a Daphnia that kind of, and this goes across all the organisms, Daphnia also have this eye spot. It's a compound eye. They're able to sense light. They will actually swim towards the light during the day because that is where the phytoplankton will be, and they'll filter feed on those. So that's a structural and behavioral adaptation. They're able to see, that's their structure, and then they're able to respond to stimuli and do certain things that allow them to live. So look for things like that in organisms, things that they're able to do. These guys will also, they have these antennae that are actually like swimming arms, and during the daytime they can swim higher in the water column, and then at nighttime they typically will sink lower in the water column, which basically provides protection for them, and during the day they can go and feed. Other structural deals, an exoskeleton, like these guys got a hard, crunchy shell, so that makes them difficult to prey upon in some instances. Obviously fish would be able to eat these dudes, find them to be a delicious snack, but there are different, it's another structural adaptation. They have, there's lots of different things that these guys are able to do. If you read about them, we want things that help them survive, that help them thrive in the environments they're in. So when we take that into other organisms like your dinoflagellates, look at their reproduction. How does that help them survive? They're able to do binary fission, which is an asexual reproduction. They're also able to go dormant to some degree, and then another, like A lot of these guys will form colonies with each other by colonizing. That's kind of a behavioral mechanism that then allows them to survive. A lot of these guys are small little plankton, so if they've got a lot of numbers, that's kind of a strength in numbers thing, as well as if you make yourself bigger, then typically you make yourself sink slower in terms of small things linking together to produce long chains. They will then sink slower. So like cyanobacteria forms like a pearl necklace. Those sink much slower. They're known to colonize in big mounds too. Those big mounds can actually anchor to the sea bottom and then continue to just grow more and more each year. They're called stromatolites. So there's a lot of different adaptations, both behavioral and structural. Some of them are structural that are used for behaviors. So that's kind of what we're looking for here. What are those things that make these guys thrive in those aquatic environments? And I think if you kind of focus your ideas there, that's kind of what the quiz is going to be about. It'll be multiple choice. It'll be about reproductive behaviors. It'll be about structural components, and then beyond that, it'll just be about identifying who's what. So if I throw a picture of a Daphnia on there, you should be able to identify a Daphnia, which this one is giving birth to her babies. Notice they have the eggs. They hatch the eggs inside, brood them for 3 to 5 days, and then let them free. So anyway, I just wanted to put this in there and just to give you an idea of kind of what I'm looking for, what you're looking for. So remember, project is due soon. Be sure you have, six bullet points or so about each organism, picture of each organism, and you should be good on that. If you have any questions, email me, call me. I'll be happy to help. Until then, good luck. Talk to you soon.